At the Legacy Stables Gala, under the vaulted beams of the main barn, my brother Logan stood on the podium like he had already been crowned king. He tapped his champagne flute, the crystal ringing out over the silence, and announced with a grin that threatened to split his face, "Mom and Dad have decided. The entire ranch, the bloodlines, the legacy, it's all going to me. Haley, sorry, but you're getting nothing." The room exploded. Cheers, whistles, the sound of 300 people celebrating my erasure. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, looked straight at my father, and said, "Dad, you really don't know, do you?" He froze, the color draining from his face, as if his heart had just stopped. My brother screamed over the dying applause. "No, what? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I didn't wait for an answer to my brother's scream. I didn't wait for my father to find the breath he had lost. I didn't look at my mother, who was clutching her pearls like they were the only thing keeping her upright. I simply turned and walked toward the audiovisual cart at the side of the stage. My movements were precise, efficient, the way I walked when I was entering a boardroom to deliver bad news to a failing company. There was no hesitation in my stride, no tremble in my hands. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This was a correction. The hum of the crowd had died down to a confused murmur. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes on my back, heavy with judgment and curiosity. They expected a scene. They expected the jealous sister to throw a glass or make a tearful speech about fairness. They didn't expect me to reach for the main HDMI cable connecting Logan's laptop to the massive projector screen behind him. I pulled it out. The image of Logan standing next to a prize stallion flickered and died, plunging the stage into a momentary gray static. Logan started to step forward, his laugh nervous and high-pitched. "Haley, what do you think you're doing? You're drunk. Someone get her water." I ignored him. I pulled my own laptop from my bag, the aluminum casing cool against my fingers, and plugged it in. The connection took 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. The screen behind me roared back to life, but the smiling photos were gone. In their place was a stark, high-contrast timeline. The header was bold, black text on a white background. Legacy Stables, Forensic Audit, 2021 to 2024. The silence in the barn shifted. It went from awkward to terrified. You could hear the sudden intake of breath from the front row where the bankers and investors sat. They knew what an audit looked like. They knew what it meant when the numbers were projected in red. "This isn't a toast," I said, my voice amplified by the acoustics of the barn, though I wasn't holding a microphone. "This is the bill." I hit the spacebar. The first data point appeared. January 2021. A withdrawal of $15,000. The memo line read, "Barn roof repair." Below it, I displayed the corresponding bank transfer record. It didn't go to a contractor. It went to a crypto wallet. "You see," I continued, my voice level, stripped of any inflection that might be mistaken for sadness. "Logan didn't just inherit a legacy tonight. He inherited a crime scene." Logan's face went from flush to pale in a heartbeat. He looked at the screen, then at our parents, then at the crowd. "Turn it off," he hissed, his charming facade cracking like cheap plaster. "Dad, tell her to turn it off." But Dad couldn't speak. He was staring at the screen, at the numbers that were unraveling his golden boy's reputation in real time. I hit the spacebar again. March 2021. $22,000. Labeled Veterinary Emergency. Transferred to a casino in Las Vegas. I watched the realization ripple through the room. This wasn't a family squabble. This was evidence. My anger wasn't loud. It was clinical. I wasn't there to scream. I was there to balance the ledger. And I was just getting started. To understand how we got to this point, projecting forensic audits at a black tie gala, you have to understand the invisible machinery of my family. I was never the daughter. I was the overhead. While Logan was the asset my parents invested in, polished, and paraded around Lexington, I was the maintenance cost they tried to keep off the books. I learned early on that in the Whitaker household, affection was a currency, and I was perpetually overdrawn. When I was 12, I asked for writing lessons. My mother sighed, checked her watch, and told me we couldn't afford the distraction because Logan needed a new trailer for his show jumping tour. 2 days later, a $40,000 horse trailer arrived in the driveway.
I didn't cry.
I just started doing the math. I became the fixer. The one who understood the difference between net and gross, between a liability and an asset. While Logan was out shaking hands and charming investors with a smile that cost $5,000 in orthodontics, I was in the back office, reconciling the accounts he messed up. I fixed the payroll errors. I smoothed over the vendor disputes. I made sure the light stayed on so he could shine. 3 years ago, everything changed. Grandma Eleanor called me to her study. She was the only person in this family who looked at me and saw something other than a utility. She sat behind her mahogany desk, frail but sharp as a tack, 2 folders in front of her. "Haley," she said, sliding the first folder across the desk. "Look at this."
It was a disaster.
$550,000 missing over 18 months. Siphoned off in increments that were just small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to bleed the ranch dry. The memo lines were creative: feed surplus, veterinary consults, fence repairs that never happened. But the digital trail led to one place: online gambling sites and a series of disastrous crypto wallets owned by Logan. Grandma watched me read, her face grim. "He's not just incompetent," she said. "He's dangerous. If your parents get control of this ranch, they will hand it to him, and he will lose it in a year." She opened the second folder. It contained a revocable living trust and a quitclaim deed. She had already drawn them up. She was bypassing my parents. She was bypassing Logan. She was giving the ranch, the land, the horses, the legacy, to me. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because you know what this place actually is," she said. "It's not a trophy. It's a business. It's 30 families who rely on us for a paycheck. It's the bloodlines we've spent 50 years building. You won't gamble it away. You'll protect it." She made me promise not to say a word. Not until it was necessary. Not until they tried to destroy what she had built.
So I signed.
We recorded the deed quietly in the next county over. And for 3 years, I went back to being the invisible fixer, watching my brother play king of a castle he didn't even know he had lost. I stayed silent because I had been trained to be silent. It's a trap, you know. The trap of normalizing cruelty. When you grow up as the scapegoat, you start to believe that being used is your natural state. You think that keeping the peace is more important than telling the truth. You convince yourself that if you just work hard enough, fix enough problems, maybe, just maybe, they'll finally see you. But they never do. They just give you more work. I looked at the audit on the screen, then at the faces of my family in the front row. For 3 years, I had let them treat me like a servant in my own house. I had let them plan this gala, let them toast to Logan's future, let them erase me from the narrative. But tonight, the ledger was finally balancing. I wasn't just exposing a theft. I was breaking the normalization. I was rewriting the terms of the contract. And this time, I wasn't the one paying the price. To understand why I chose the gala, why I chose the lights, the crowd, and the public humiliation, you have to see what happened 7 days prior. You have to understand that I didn't declare war.
They did.
I was summoned to the main house on a Tuesday. Family meeting. My mother had texted. Urgent. When I arrived, there was no food, no pleasantries. Just my father, Richard, sitting behind the massive oak desk in the study, my mother, Karen, pacing near the window, and Logan, lounging on the leather sofa, scrolling on his phone like he was bored by the inconvenience of my existence. "Sit down, Haley," Dad said.
He didn't ask.
He ordered. I sat. The air in the room was stale, smelling of old paper and expensive scotch. Dad slid a document across the desk. It was thick, bound in blue legal backing. The title page read, Legacy Consolidation Agreement. "We're restructuring," Dad said, his voice smooth, practicing the pitch. "With the gala coming up and Logan officially taking the reins, we need to clean up the estate. Simplify the holdings. This document just formalizes that process." I flipped the page. It wasn't a restructuring. It was an abdication. "This is a waiver," I said, my voice flat. You want me to waive any and all future claims to the Whitaker estate, the ranch, and the trust. It's standard, Mom interjected, stepping forward with a tight, pained smile. It protects the business. You know how banks are. They like single ownership. It makes refinancing easier. Refinancing? I repeated. I looked at Logan. He didn't look up from his phone, but I saw the tension in his jaw. They needed money. They had burned through the cash reserves, and now they needed to leverage the land they thought they owned, to cover the hole. But they couldn't get a loan if there was a potential contesting heir. They needed me to sign away my rights so they could mortgage the legacy into oblivion. I'm not signing this, I said, closing the folder. Logan snorted. Don't be difficult, Haley. You have your little accounting job in the city. You're fine. I have a legacy to uphold. I have actual responsibilities. Responsibilities. I looked at him. Like the crypto wallet? Like the gambling debts? Dad slammed his hand on the desk. Enough. We are not discussing your brother's learning curve. We are discussing the future of this family. You are being selfish, Haley. We paid for your degree. We put a roof over your head. Now, when the family needs unity, you want to hold us hostage? I'm not holding you hostage, I said. I'm refusing to be erased. If you don't sign this by Saturday, Mom said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper, don't bother coming to the gala. In fact, don't bother coming back at all. We will cut you off. No contact. No support. You will be a stranger to us. It was an ultimatum. Sign or be exiled. They were betting on my fear. They were betting that the desperate, lonely little girl who used to beg for writing lessons would do anything to stay in their orbit. But that little girl was gone. In her place was a forensic accountant who knew exactly who held the deeds. I stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked at my father, then my mother, then my brother. I saw them for what they were, liabilities. I'll be at the gala, I said calmly. And we can settle the ownership issue then. They took it as a surrender. They thought I needed a few days to process my defeat. They had no idea I was giving them 3 days to hang themselves. I walked out of the study, the unsigned waiver left on the desk. That was the moment I decided. They wanted a show? I would give them one. They wanted to consolidate the legacy? I would make sure it was consolidated into the only hands that wouldn't destroy it. Mine. Back in the barn, the audit timeline on the screen was now glowing with the cold, hard light of truth. I clicked the remote in my hand. Next slide. The screen shifted from the financial drain to the communication trail. It was a grid of emails, texts, and internal memos between my parents and Logan. I had found them on the family server, the same server I maintained because Logan couldn't remember his passwords. You might say you didn't know, I said, addressing my parents directly. You might say Logan fooled you, but these are your emails. I pointed to a message from Mom to Logan, dated 6 months prior. The feed supplier called again. We're overdrawn. I'll move money from the maintenance fund, but you have to stop transferring cash to that exchange. Dad is getting suspicious. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mom wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice. She knew he was stealing. She knew he was jeopardizing the business. And she chose to cover it up rather than confront her golden child. And here, I said, clicking again. An email from Dad to the bank. Please ignore the overdraft alert. Accounting error. We are restructuring. You called it an accounting error, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. I call it embezzlement. You knew he was bleeding the ranch dry. You knew the horses were at risk because we couldn't pay the vet bills. And instead of stopping him, you tried to force me to sign a waiver so you could get a loan to cover his tracks. Stop this. Dad shouted, stepping forward, his face a mask of fury and panic. You have no right. This is family business. Turn it off immediately. I am your father, and I am ordering you to stop. You're ordering me? I asked, a small, cold smile touching my lips. On whose authority? I am the owner of this estate, he bellowed, trying to reclaim the power he thought he held. My name is on the sign. My name is on the deed. Is it? I clicked the remote one last time. The emails vanished. In their place appeared a single, high-resolution document. A deed of trust. Recorded 3 years ago. The grantor, Eleanor Whitaker. The grantee, the Eleanor Whitaker Revocable Trust. The trustee, Haley Whitaker. It's the illusion of power of the empty wallet, I said, my voice calm but projecting to the back of the barn. You think your name gives you authority. You think your status gives you control. But without the deed, without the asset, you're just ghosts haunting a house you don't own. I didn't sign your waiver, Dad, because I couldn't waive what I already owned. This ranch has been mine for 3 years. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a hallucination shattering. My parents stood there, their mouths open, their eyes wide, realizing that for 3 years, they had been barking orders at the landlord. They had been trying to evict the owner. The power they thought they had was nothing but smoke. And I had just turned on the fan. That's a lie. Logan shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He lunged toward the stage, but stopped short when he saw the security guards I had hired, 2 off-duty state troopers, step out from the shadows of the barn entrance. Grandma was sick. She was on medication. She didn't know what she was signing 3 years ago. You manipulated a senile old woman to steal my inheritance. Senile? I repeated, my voice cool. Is that the defense you're going with? That Eleanor Whitaker was too confused to understand legal documents. Yes, Mom cried out, grasping at the lifeline Logan had thrown. She was confused at the end, Haley. Everyone knew that. A judge will throw that trust out in a heartbeat. You took advantage of her. Okay, I said, nodding slowly. Let's assume you're right. Let's assume Grandma didn't know what she was doing. If that's true, then how do you explain this? I hit the spacebar. The deed of trust vanished. A new document filled the massive screen. It was a loan agreement from a private equity firm in Louisville, a predatory lender known for high-interest bridge loans. The amount, $1,200,000. The collateral, Legacy Stables. The date, 6 months ago. The signature at the bottom, Eleanor Whitaker. The barn went silent again, but this time, the silence wasn't confused. It was heavy. It was the sound of oxygen leaving the room. This loan was taken out 6 months ago, I said, walking to the edge of the stage. $1.2 million, wired directly to an offshore account that traces back to the same crypto exchange where Logan lost the first $500,000. But here's the problem with your senile defense, Mom. Even if Grandma hadn't transferred the property to me 3 years ago, she couldn't have signed this loan. I looked at Logan. He was shaking now, a visible tremor running through his hands. Grandma had a stroke 8 months ago, I said, my voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. She lost the use of her right hand. We all know that. We were all there. So, tell me, Logan, how did a woman who couldn't hold a spoon sign a perfect, flowing signature on a loan document 2 months later? I let the question hang there. The answer was obvious to everyone in the room. It was obvious to the bankers in the front row. It was obvious to the investors. She didn't. I answered for him. You did. I. Logan stammered, looking for an exit that didn't exist. You forged her signature, I said. And you used a property you didn't own as collateral. Do you know what that is? That isn't a family misunderstanding. That isn't an inheritance dispute. That is bank fraud. That is wire fraud. That is aggravated identity theft involving a vulnerable elderly person. I pointed to the screen. This document? This is a felony. A federal felony. And since the collateral you put up, my ranch, wasn't yours to pledge, that money is unsecured. Which means when the lenders realize they've been defrauded, they won't come for the land. They will come for you. I watched my parents. I watched the realization hit them like a physical blow. They had spent years protecting the golden child, covering his tracks, enabling his lifestyle. They thought they were fighting for his legacy. But looking at that signature on the screen, they realized they weren't fighting for an heir. They were protecting a criminal. This is the lethal discovery, I said, closing my laptop, plunging the screen into darkness. I own the ranch. Logan owns the debt. And the only reason he isn't in handcuffs right now is because I haven't sent this file to the FBI yet. I looked at my brother, stripped of his arrogance, stripped of his crown. You wanted the spotlight, Logan. You got it. The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a lead blanket. The guests, the bankers, the investors, the neighbors were no longer spectators at a gala. They were witnesses at an arraignment. They began to pull away, physically stepping back from my family as if the criminality was contagious. Logan looked at the screen where his forgery still glowed, then back at me. The arrogance that had defined him for 32 years evaporated. He wasn't the king of Kentucky anymore. He was a man who owed dangerous people $1.2 million he didn't have, secured by a lie. Haley, he stammered, his voice trembling. You can't report this. The lenders, if they find out the collateral isn't real, they'll kill me. You know who these people are. I do, I said calmly. That's why I didn't borrow money from them. You did. My mother rushed the stage, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and painful. Haley, please. He's your brother. We can fix this. We can sell the condo in Florida. We can liquidate Dad's retirement. We just need time. Don't destroy him. I looked at her hand on my arm, then up at her eyes. The same eyes that had looked away when I was ignored. The same eyes that had watched me work myself to the bone while Logan played. Fix it, I asked, pulling my arm away. Like you fixed the embezzlement 3 years ago? Like you fixed the gambling debts? You don't want to fix it, Mom. You want me to absorb it. You want me to sell my ranch to pay for his crimes. It's family, Dad shouted, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. He looked old suddenly, deflated by the weight of the truth. We do this for family. No, I said. You do this for Logan. You have never done this for me. I walked over to my laptop and closed the lid. The screen went black, plunging the barn back into the soft, ambient lighting of the gala. The show was over. Now came the eviction. The time for fixing it is over, I said. I am the trustee of the Eleanor Whitaker Trust. I have a fiduciary duty to protect the assets from liabilities. And Logan is a liability. I signaled to the back of the room. The 2 off-duty state troopers I had hired stepped forward, their boots heavy on the barn floor. They weren't there for crowd control. They were there for this exact moment. Gentlemen, I said, pointing at my brother. Please escort Mr. Whitaker off the property. He is trespassing. You can't do this. Logan screamed as the officers took his arms. This is my house. I grew up here. It was your house, I corrected. Now it's my ranch. And you aren't on the guest list. I watched as they dragged him toward the double doors. He kicked and shouted, a tantrum that had worked for 3 decades finally failing him. As they hauled him out into the Kentucky night, I looked at my parents. They stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of their reputation. You can stay for the rest of the party if you like, I told them, my voice devoid of malice, just cold fact. But I suggest you leave. You have a lot of calls to make. I imagine the FBI will be here by morning. They didn't say a word. They just shrank. They turned and followed their golden child out into the dark, leaving me standing alone on the stage. I looked out at the crowd, at the people who had cheered my erasure just an hour ago. Thank you all for coming, I said. Please, enjoy the champagne. It's on the house. My house. I walked off the stage, feeling the floorboards solid beneath my feet. I didn't look back. The power flip was complete. The ledger was balanced. And the eviction was final. 3 months later, the dust has finally settled over Lexington. But the landscape looks very different. Logan was indicted last week on 4 counts of federal bank fraud and identity theft. He's currently out on bail, living in a studio apartment downtown, waiting for a trial that will likely end in a 5-year sentence. My parents sold their house, the one they leveraged to the hilt to keep up appearances, and moved into a rented condo. They call me occasionally, leaving voicemails that oscillate between rage and begging. I don't listen to them. I archive them. Evidence for a rainy day I hope never comes. I stood by the white paddock fence this morning, watching the sunrise burn the mist off the bluegrass. It was quiet. No shouting. No false toasts. Just the sound of horses grazing and the wind in the trees. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel like isolation. It felt like sovereignty. There is a concept I read about once called the justice of the sower. It says that true justice isn't just about cutting down the dead trees, it's about what you plant in the clearing. People looked at what I did at the gala and called it revenge. They called it destruction. But they were wrong. I didn't destroy legacy stables. I pruned the rot. I removed the parasite that was killing the host. Now, the soil is ready for something new. I'm not keeping the ranch exactly as it was. I'm not interested in the high-stakes, cutthroat world of trophy breeding that my parents idolized. Next month, Legacy Stables is launching a new program. We are partnering with a local nonprofit to provide equine therapy for trauma survivors, kids who, like me, were told they were invisible or broken or less than. We are shifting to ethical breeding and rehabilitation. This is the real inheritance. It's not the land, or the barns, or the millions in assets. It's the ability to choose what grows here. Grandma Eleanor didn't give me this ranch just to keep it. She gave it to me to transform it. She knew that I was the only one strong enough to hold the plow. I walked back to the main house, my boots crunching on the gravel. I stopped at the office door, the one my father used to forbid me from entering. I unlocked it with my own key. Inside, the desk was clear. The ledger was open. And for the first time in 30 years, the numbers finally balanced. If you've ever had to become the villain in their story just to survive in yours, share this video. You aren't alone.